When most people hear the name Adam Smith, they immediately think of one thing: free markets. They picture a world where businesses compete, prices are determined naturally, and the government stays out of the way. Some people even imagine Adam Smith as the guy who wanted government to disappear completely and let the market handle everything. But that's not what he actually believed. In fact, when you get to Book 5 of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith spends hundreds of pages talking about something that surprises a lot of readers: government. Not how to get rid of it, not how to shrink it to nothing, but what government should actually do. And honestly, this might be one of the most relevant parts of the entire book today. Because whether you're talking about America, Britain, China, Germany, Canada, or anywhere else, people are still arguing about the same question Adam Smith was trying to answer more than 250 years ago. How much government do we need? Some people think government should be heavily involved in society. Others believe government should stay as small as possible. Some people blame government for every problem. Others expect government to solve every problem. Adam Smith looked at this debate from a different angle. Instead of asking, should government exist? He asked, what are the things that only government can do well? That's a much smarter question, because if we're honest, most people don't wake up in the morning thinking about politics. They care about practical things. Can I safely own my property? Can I run a business? Can I trust contracts? Can I walk outside without fearing violence? Can I invest money without worrying someone will simply take it? These things seem normal to us because we live with them every day. But Adam Smith understood something important. None of these things happen automatically. Civilization isn't the default setting. Order isn't automatic. Someone has to maintain it. Imagine for a moment that tomorrow every police officer disappeared, every court shut down, every legal system stopped functioning. No judges, no contract enforcement, no property rights, no government authority. What happens? At first, maybe not much. People would continue living normally because habits don't disappear overnight. But eventually, problems would start showing up. A customer refuses to pay a business. Who enforces the contract? Someone steals your car. Who investigates? A company dumps toxic waste into a river. Who stops them? A criminal gang takes over a neighborhood. Who removes them? The free market can't solve these problems by itself. The market is incredibly powerful at creating wealth. It's excellent at coordinating millions of people. It's amazing at encouraging innovation. But the market assumes certain rules already exist. Without those rules, the system begins to break down. Think about a football game. The players compete against each other. One team wins, one team loses. Competition creates excitement. But imagine playing without referees. No rules, no penalties, no boundaries, no enforcement. It wouldn't become a better game, it would become chaos. The market works the same way. Competition is important, freedom is important, but rules matter too. Adam Smith understood this better than many people who quote him today. One of the biggest misconceptions about Smith is that he believed government and markets were enemies. He didn't. He believed they served different functions. Markets create prosperity, governments create stability, and prosperity needs stability. Think about entrepreneurs. People often celebrate successful business owners as self-made individuals, and many of them work incredibly hard. But even the most successful entrepreneur depends on systems they didn't create. When a business owner signs a contract, courts enforce it. When goods move across highways, public infrastructure makes it possible. When employees arrive safely at work, law enforcement contributes to that stability. When intellectual property is protected, innovation becomes worthwhile. In other words, even private success often depends on public institutions. Adam Smith saw this clearly. He wasn't arguing for a giant government controlling every aspect of life. Far from it. He criticized excessive regulations. He criticized government favoritism. He criticized wasteful spending. But he also recognized that some functions are absolutely essential. Without them, economic growth becomes impossible. This is where modern debates often become confusing. People sometimes talk as if there are only two options. Either government controls everything, or government does nothing. Adam Smith rejected both extremes. He believed in limited government. But limited doesn't mean non-existent. A referee doesn't score goals, but the game still needs a referee. A foundation isn't the building itself, but without a foundation, the building collapses. Government, in Smith's view, should create the conditions that allow people to pursue their own goals. It shouldn't run every business. It shouldn't make every decision, but it should provide the framework that allows society to function. This idea might sound obvious today, but it was revolutionary in Smith's time. Remember, he was writing in the 18th century. Many governments were deeply involved in controlling trade, granting monopolies, restricting competition, protecting politically connected businesses. Smith opposed those practices. He wanted more economic freedom,
But he never argued that society could function without institutions. In fact, the success of free markets depends on institutions. That's one of the biggest lessons from Book 5. People often focus on Adam Smith's famous phrase about the invisible hand, but they forget that invisible hands still need visible institutions. The market can help determine prices. The market can allocate resources. The market can reward innovation. But the market cannot replace the rule of law. It cannot replace national defense. It cannot replace a functioning justice system. Those responsibilities belong elsewhere, and that's where government comes in. By the time Adam Smith reaches Book 5, he's no longer asking how wealth is created. He's asking how a wealthy society can remain stable, secure, and prosperous over the long term. Because creating wealth is only half the challenge. Protecting the conditions that make wealth possible is the other half. And that's where his discussion of government begins. Not as an enemy of freedom, not as a replacement for markets, but as a necessary partner in creating a society where individuals can work, trade, invest, and build better lives. That's the foundation of everything that follows in Book 5. And it starts with a simple but powerful idea. A free market doesn't eliminate the need for government. A free market works best when the right kind of government is already in place.
Imagine spending your entire life building something. You start a business from scratch. You work late nights. You save money. You buy a home. You invest for the future. Little by little, year after year, your life improves. Now imagine all of that disappearing overnight because your country can no longer protect itself. A foreign army invades. A civil war breaks out. Trade routes collapse. Businesses shut down. Property loses value. Investments become worthless. Suddenly, everything you've spent decades building is at risk. This is exactly why Adam Smith begins his discussion of government responsibilities with one subject above all others: national defense. Before roads, before education, before taxes, before public spending, defense comes first. And when you think about it, his reasoning is surprisingly simple. A nation cannot become wealthy if it cannot remain secure. Most people today take security for granted. We wake up, go to work, order products online, make investments, and plan for the future without constantly worrying about foreign armies crossing the border. But throughout most of human history, security was never guaranteed. In fact, for thousands of years, war was one of the greatest threats to economic prosperity. A successful city could be destroyed. A thriving trading network could disappear. Generations of wealth could vanish in a matter of months. Adam Smith understood that economic growth depends on something deeper than business activity. It depends on stability, and stability depends on security. Think about it from the perspective of an investor. Would you put your life savings into a factory if you believed it could be destroyed next year by an invading army? Probably not. Would you spend years building a company if you thought political chaos might wipe out everything you've created? Probably not. Would banks lend money? Would entrepreneurs take risks? Would businesses hire workers? Most likely no. When security disappears, long-term thinking disappears with it. People stop investing in the future and start focusing only on survival. That's why defense isn't just a military issue. It's an economic issue. In Adam Smith's view, one of the government's most important responsibilities is protecting the conditions that allow commerce to exist in the first place. Because markets cannot function without safety. You can have brilliant entrepreneurs, talented workers, innovative companies, but if a nation cannot defend itself, all of those advantages become fragile. This leads to an important question. Why can't private companies simply provide national defense? After all, Adam Smith believed markets are efficient, so why not let businesses compete to provide military protection? The answer is that national defense is what economists today call a public good. Everyone benefits from it, whether you personally pay for it or not. Imagine a city protected by a military force. The protection doesn't stop at the property line of taxpayers. Everyone inside the country benefits from the security. Because of this, defense creates what economists call a free rider problem. People would have an incentive to let others pay while still enjoying the benefits. Eventually, not enough money would be collected to provide adequate protection. Adam Smith recognized this long before modern economics developed formal terminology. He understood that certain services are difficult or impossible to organize through ordinary market transactions. Defense is one of them. A nation's survival cannot depend entirely on voluntary purchases. It requires collective action, and government is the institution capable of organizing that action. History provides countless examples supporting Smith's argument.
Look at the rise of ancient civilizations. The cities that prospered were often the cities that could defend themselves. Trade flourished where merchants felt safe. Wealth accumulated where property was protected. Economic activity expanded where governments maintained order and security. The opposite was also true. When defense failed, prosperity often collapsed. Trade routes became dangerous. Investment dried up. Production slowed. People focused on immediate survival rather than long-term growth. Even today, you can see the relationship between security and prosperity. Countries with stable borders and effective security institutions tend to attract more investment. Businesses feel comfortable making long-term plans. People are willing to buy homes, start companies, and build wealth. Meanwhile, regions experiencing conflict often struggle economically, regardless of their natural resources or talent. Security creates confidence. Confidence encourages investment. Investment creates growth. Adam Smith saw this chain of events clearly. What's interesting is that he didn't view military spending as inherently wasteful. Many people today debate government budgets and argue about whether defense spending is too high or too low. Those are important discussions. But Smith's broader point was different. He wasn't saying every military expense is justified. He was saying that defense itself is indispensable. A government may fail in many ways. It may spend inefficiently. It may create unnecessary regulations. It may make poor policy decisions. But if it cannot protect the nation, all its other achievements become vulnerable. In many ways, defense is like insurance. Most people don't enjoy paying insurance premiums. You don't wake up excited about them, but you appreciate having insurance when disaster strikes. National defense works similarly. Its success is often invisible. When defense works well, daily life continues normally. Businesses open, schools operate, investments grow, families make plans. People rarely think about the military because security feels ordinary. But that sense of normality is precisely what economic prosperity possible. Adam Smith understood something that remains true today. Peace is productive. Security creates opportunity, and opportunity creates wealth. This is why he places national defense at the very top of government's responsibilities. Not because war creates prosperity, quite the opposite. Because effective defense helps preserve the peace that allows prosperity to grow. Before people can trade freely, they must be safe. Before businesses can invest confidently, they must be secure. Before markets can create wealth, society must be protected. That is why, in Adam Smith's view, the first duty of government is not managing the economy. It is protecting the nation that makes economic activity possible. Everything else comes after that.
Imagine this situation. You spend 6 months working on a project for a client. You deliver everything you promised. The work is completed. The client is happy. Then the payment date arrives, and the client says, "I'm not paying." What do? You send emails. No response. You make phone calls. No response. You demand payment. Still nothing. Now imagine there are no courts, no judges, no legal system, no contract enforcement. What happens next? For most of human history, the answer was simple. People settled disputes through force. If someone stole from you, you fought back. If someone refused to honor an agreement, you threatened them. If two groups disagreed, violence often became the final decision maker. In that kind of world, wealth is difficult to create and even harder to keep. That's why Adam Smith believed the second major responsibility of government was justice. Not charity, not economic planning, justice. Because without justice, a free market cannot function. In fact, without justice, civilization itself begins to break down. Many people think economic growth starts with money. Smith disagreed. He believed economic growth starts with trust. Think about how many acts of trust happen every day. You buy something online before receiving it. An employer pays workers expecting them to show up tomorrow. A bank lends money expecting repayment years later. A landlord rents property to a tenant. A supplier ships products to a customer. A business signs a contract with another business. Modern economies are built on millions of promises, and promises only have value when people believe they will be honored. The legal system helps create that confidence. When contracts can be enforced, people are willing to make agreements. When property is protected, people are willing to invest. When fraud is punished, people are more willing to take risks. Without those protections, trust collapses. And when trust collapses, economic activity slows down. Imagine trying to run a business where every transaction requires fear and suspicion. Every customer might scam you. Every supplier might disappear. Every partner might break their promises.
Every investment could be stolen. Business would become exhausting. Growth would become nearly impossible. This is one of Adam Smith's most important insights. The rule of law is not separate from economic prosperity. It is one of the foundations of economic prosperity. Today, we often hear people talk about infrastructure: roads, bridges, ports, airports. These things matter, but Smith would argue that legal institutions are also infrastructure, not physical infrastructure, institutional infrastructure. A modern economy depends on both. A highway helps goods move. A court system helps agreements move. A bridge connects places. The rule of law connects people who may never meet face to face. Without those institutions, commerce becomes slower, riskier, and more expensive. One of the most important concepts Smith discusses is property rights. At first glance, property rights sound boring: legal paperwork, technical rules, government regulations. But property rights are actually one of the most powerful drivers of prosperity. Why? Because people invest when they believe they can keep the rewards of their investment. Imagine owning a farm. You spend years improving the land. You build fences, you buy equipment, you increase productivity. Now imagine someone can simply take the farm whenever they want. Would you still invest? Probably not. The same principle applies to businesses, to houses, to inventions, to savings accounts, to retirement funds. People are willing to sacrifice today because they believe they will benefit tomorrow. Property rights help create that confidence. When those rights are weak, long-term thinking becomes difficult. People stop building for the future. They focus on protecting themselves in the present. That's why countries with strong legal institutions often experience higher levels of economic growth. It's not necessarily because their citizens are smarter, or more hardworking, or more talented. It's because people feel safer making long-term investments. They trust that their efforts won't simply be taken away. Adam Smith recognized this relationship centuries before economists had modern data to measure it. He observed that secure property and predictable justice encouraged commerce, and commerce generated wealth. The opposite was also true. Corruption, favoritism, and arbitrary government actions discouraged economic activity. Imagine two entrepreneurs. Both have good business ideas, both have access to resources, both are willing to work hard. One operates in a country where contracts are enforced fairly. The other operates in a country where outcomes depend on political connections and bribery. Which entrepreneur is more likely to invest aggressively? Which one is more likely to hire employees? Which one is more likely to expand operations? The answer is obvious. Predictability encourages growth. Uncertainty discourages it. That's why Smith believed justice was one of the government's most essential responsibilities. Not because courts directly create wealth, but because they create the environment where wealth can be created. Justice acts like the operating system of society. Most people rarely think about it, just like people rarely think about the software running inside their phones. But when the system fails, everything else becomes harder. Businesses struggle, investments decline, trust disappears, economic activity slows down. This is also why Smith viewed equal application of the law as critically important. If laws only protect the rich, trust breaks down. If laws only protect the politically connected, trust breaks down. If justice can be bought, trust breaks down. Markets depend on the belief that rules apply consistently. Not perfectly. No legal system is perfect. But consistently. The more people trust institutions, the more willing they are to cooperate with strangers. And cooperation on a massive scale is what makes modern economies possible. A farmer sells food to people he'll never meet. A factory produces products for customers across the world. Investors fund businesses run by complete strangers. All of this depends on trust. And trust depends heavily on justice. Adam Smith understood that a prosperous society requires more than freedom. It requires rules that protect freedom. It requires institutions that protect agreements. It requires laws that protect property. That's why he placed justice immediately after national defense. A nation must first be protected from external threats. Then it must be protected from internal disorder. Because before wealth can be created, people need confidence that their work, property, contracts, and future plans will be respected. In Adam Smith's view, justice isn't merely a moral ideal. It's one of the most important economic institutions ever created. And without it, the entire system starts to fall apart.
Imagine you're an investor. Someone walks into your office and presents a business opportunity. The project will cost billions of dollars. Construction will take years. The return on investment may not arrive for decades. And once it's finished, millions of people will benefit, including many who never pay directly for it. Would you invest? Most private investors would hesitate, not because the project lacks value, but because the economics don't make sense from a purely private perspective. Now think about highways, bridges, ports, canals, public water systems, subway networks, airports. These projects often transform entire economies, yet many of them would never exist if governments waited for private companies to build them entirely on their own. This is exactly the problem Adam Smith addresses when discussing the third major duty of government, public works, or what we would call infrastructure today. Many people are surprised by this section of The Wealth of Nations. After all,
Adam Smith is famous for advocating free markets. So why is he talking about government-funded projects? Because Smith understood something that remains true even today. Some investments create enormous benefits for society, but generate limited profits for individual investors. And when that happens, the market may underinvest. Let's imagine a remote town separated from major cities by rough terrain. Businesses struggle to transport goods. Farmers have difficulty reaching customers. Workers have fewer opportunities. Economic growth remains slow. Now, suppose a modern highway is built connecting that town to major markets. Suddenly, transportation becomes easier. Businesses expand. Property values increase. New industries emerge. Jobs appear. Trade grows. The entire region becomes more productive. The benefits are enormous. But here's the challenge. Who captures those benefits? Not just one company, not just one investor. Everyone benefits. Drivers benefit. Businesses benefit. Consumers benefit. Property owners benefit. Future generations benefit. Because the gains are spread across society, no single private investor may have enough incentive to fund the project alone. This is where Smith believed government has an important role. Not because government is always better at building things, but because some projects create public benefits that private markets struggle to capture. In modern economics, these are often called public goods or positive externalities. Adam Smith didn't use those exact terms, but he clearly understood the concept. He observed that certain public works could increase national prosperity even when they weren't highly profitable for private investors. Think about the internet, the smartphones we carry today, the global economy that allows products to move across continents. Many of these developments depend on infrastructure built over decades: roads, ports, power grids, communication networks. These systems create opportunities that extend far beyond the organizations that originally built them. Infrastructure acts like an economic multiplier. A single bridge doesn't just help people cross a river. It connects communities. It reduces transportation costs. It saves time. It encourages investment. It makes new business models possible. One project can influence thousands of future decisions. That's why infrastructure often generates benefits far greater than its original cost. Adam Smith saw this relationship clearly. He recognized that transportation networks were particularly important. Remember, he was writing in the 18th century. At that time, moving goods was expensive, slow, and difficult. Road conditions were often terrible. Travel could take days or weeks. Transportation costs significantly increased prices. As a result, improving transportation infrastructure could dramatically increase economic efficiency. When goods move easier, markets become larger. When markets become larger, specialization increases. When specialization increases, productivity rises. And when productivity rises, societies become wealthier. This idea connects directly to one of Smith's most famous arguments from earlier in the book, the division of labor. The more people specialize, the more productive they become. But specialization only works when people can trade efficiently, and efficient trade often depends on infrastructure. In other words, roads and bridges don't just help people travel. They help make specialization possible. They help expand markets. They help unlock economic growth. Smith believed government should focus on projects like these because they create conditions that allow private enterprise to flourish. Notice the pattern. National defense protects the nation. Justice protects agreements. Infrastructure improves opportunity. Each responsibility supports economic activity without directly controlling it. This distinction is important. Adam Smith wasn't arguing that government should run businesses. He wasn't proposing central planning. He wasn't suggesting that government replace private enterprise. Instead, he believed government should provide certain foundations that help private enterprise succeed. Think of infrastructure as the stage. Businesses are the performers. Entrepreneurs are the actors. Investors are the producers. But without a stage, the performance becomes difficult. Infrastructure creates the environment where economic activity can thrive. You can see this principle throughout history. Some of the world's most prosperous regions developed around major transportation networks. Ports became centers of commerce. Railroads transformed entire economies. Highways connected cities and expanded markets. Airports linked nations to global trade. These projects often coordination and investment beyond what individual businesses could easily provide, and the results were often transformative. Today, we sometimes take infrastructure for granted. We expect electricity when we flip a switch. We expect clean water from the tap. We expect packages to arrive quickly. We expect internet connections to work. But behind every convenience lies an enormous network of systems built over generations. Those systems help businesses operate more efficiently. They reduce costs. They increase productivity. They create opportunities that would otherwise not exist. Adam Smith recognized that government has a legitimate role in creating and maintaining these foundations, not because government should dominate economic life, but because some investments produce widespread benefits that markets alone may not provide adequately. This idea remains remarkably relevant today. Whether we're discussing highways, airports, broadband networks, energy systems, or emerging technologies, societies continue to face the same questions Smith explored centuries ago. What kinds of investments create benefits for everyone, yet may not happen without collective action? His answer was practical. When a project significantly improves the productivity and prosperity of society, but private incentives are insufficient to make it happen, government may have a role to play, not as a substitute for markets, but as a partner that helps create the conditions where markets can thrive. And that's what makes this section of The Wealth of Nations so fascinating. The father of free market economics wasn't simply asking how to limit government. He was asking how government could help create the foundations that allow freedom, commerce, and prosperity to grow. Because a successful economy isn't built on markets alone, it's built on the systems that make markets possible.
When people think about Adam Smith, they usually imagine him talking about money, markets, trade, business, competition, profits. Education is probably the last topic that comes to mind. But one of the most surprising sections in Book 5 of The Wealth of Nations has very little to do with money directly. It's about people. More specifically, it's about what happens to people in an advanced economy. And Adam Smith was worried. Not about economic collapse, not about foreign invasion, not about a lack of innovation. He was worried about what extreme specialization might do to the average worker. This concern starts with one of Smith's most famous ideas, the division of labor. Earlier in The Wealth of Nations, Smith explains how specialization dramatically increases productivity. Instead of one person making an entire product from start to finish, workers focus on specific tasks. One person cuts, another assembles, another packages, another transports. As each person becomes highly skilled at a particular task, output increases. Businesses become more efficient. Products become cheaper. Living standards rise. This process helped fuel the Industrial Revolution, and in many ways it still drives the modern economy. Think about today's world. A software engineer writes code. A truck driver delivers goods. A surgeon performs operations. A mechanic repairs vehicles. A financial analyst evaluates investments. Everyone specializes, and because of specialization, society becomes far more productive than it would otherwise be. Adam Smith celebrated this, but he also noticed a potential problem. What happens when work becomes too repetitive? Imagine spending years doing exactly the same task every day. Not for a week, not for a month, but for decades. The same movement, the same process, the same routine. Again and again and again. Smith believed this could have unintended consequences. He worried that workers might become highly efficient at their jobs while becoming less engaged intellectually. In one of the most famous passages of Book 5, he argues that a worker who spends their entire life performing a few simple operations may lose the habit of exercising broader reasoning and judgment. In modern language, we might say that extreme specialization can narrow a person's perspective. Think about it. If your entire job consists of repeating one task thousands of times, your skill in that task may become extraordinary. But what happens to your curiosity, your ability to think critically, your understanding of the wider world? Smith feared that a society built entirely around narrow specialization could eventually produce citizens who were economically productive but intellectually underdeveloped. And that's where education enters the picture. Many people assume Adam Smith opposed public education because he supported free markets. Actually, the opposite is true. Smith believed basic education was one of the legitimate functions of government, not because he wanted government to control people's thinking, not because he believed everyone needed a university degree, but because he believed an educated population was essential for a healthy society. His argument was surprisingly practical. A nation needs more than workers. It needs citizens. People must be capable of understanding public issues, participating in civic life, making informed decisions, communicating effectively, thinking independently. Without these abilities, both freedom and prosperity become vulnerable. Education helps preserve them. What's fascinating is how modern Smith's concerns sound today. Look around at the current economy. Technology is advancing rapidly. Artificial intelligence is changing industries. Automation is replacing certain tasks. New jobs are appearing while others disappear. The skills that were valuable 10 years ago may not be enough 10 years from now. In this environment, education becomes even more important, not necessarily because everyone needs more formal schooling, but because continuous learning has become a necessity. The ability to adapt may be one of the most valuable skills in the modern economy. Adam Smith couldn't have imagined smartphones, artificial intelligence, or the internet, but he understood something timeless. Economic systems change. People must be able to change with them. Education helps make that possible. This also highlights an important distinction Smith made throughout Book 5.
He wasn't interested in government doing everything. He consistently focused on areas where government could create conditions that allow society to function better. National defense creates security. Justice creates trust. Infrastructure creates opportunity. Education develops human potential. Notice how all these responsibilities support individuals rather than replace them. Smith's vision wasn't a government that manages every aspect of life. It was a government that helps create the foundations upon which individuals can build successful lives. Education fits perfectly into that framework. A well-educated population benefits not only individual students, but society as a whole. Businesses gain more capable workers. Communities gain more informed citizens. Economies gain greater adaptability. Innovation becomes more likely. Productivity increases. The benefits spread far beyond the classroom. This is one reason education can be difficult to evaluate purely through market forces. The person receiving the education gains value, but so do future employers, future customers, future business partners, future communities. The entire society benefits from having more knowledgeable and capable citizens. Smith recognized this broader impact, and that's why he believed some level of public support for education could be justified. What's remarkable is how balanced his position was. He didn't advocate unlimited government involvement, nor did he believe education should be ignored entirely. Instead, he looked at the issue through a practical lens. What helps create a prosperous, stable, and free society? His answer included education. Because wealth isn't created only by machines, buildings, or financial capital. It's created by human beings, and the quality of those human beings matter. Skills matter, knowledge matter, judgment matter, character matter. A nation's long-term success ultimately depends on the capabilities of its people. Adam Smith understood that economic growth and human development are deeply connected. A society that neglects education may still create wealth in the short term, but over time, its ability to innovate, adapt, and compete begins to weaken. Meanwhile, societies that invest in human capital gain advantages that compound over generations. Better workers, better entrepreneurs, better leaders, better citizens. That is why this section of Book 5 remains so relevant. More than 250 years ago, Adam Smith recognized a challenge that still exists today. The economy can make people more productive, but productivity alone is not enough. A successful society needs educated individuals who can think, adapt, learn, and contribute beyond the narrow requirements of their jobs. Because in the end, the greatest asset any nation possesses isn't its natural resources, it isn't its factories, it isn't its financial system, it's its people. And investing in people may be one of the most important investments a society can ever make.
Let's be honest. Almost nobody likes paying taxes. Whether it's income tax, property tax, sales tax, or business tax, most people feel the same way when tax season arrives. There has to be a better way. And yet, every modern country collects taxes. Governments need money to operate. Armies need funding, courts need funding, roads need funding, schools need funding, public services need funding. The real question isn't whether taxes should exist. The real question is, what makes a good tax system? That's exactly the question Adam Smith tackles in one of the most famous sections of The Wealth of Nations. And what's amazing is that the principles he laid out more than 250 years ago are still discussed by economists, politicians, and policymakers today. Smith believed that taxes are necessary, but he also believed they should follow certain rules. Without those rules, taxation becomes unfair, inefficient, and damaging to economic growth. He called them the principles or canons of taxation. There are 4 of them, and together they form one of the most influential frameworks in economic history. Rule number 1, fairness. The first principle is fairness. At its core, Smith believed that citizens should contribute to the support of government in proportion to their abilities. In simple terms, people who benefit more from society and earn more income should generally contribute more. Now, debates about tax fairness have existed for centuries, and they still exist today. Should everyone pay the same percentage? Should higher earners pay higher rates? How much redistribution is appropriate? Reasonable people disagree on these questions, but Smith's broader point remains important. People are more willing to support a tax system when they believe it is fair. When taxes feel arbitrary or unjust, resentment grows. Trust declines. Compliance falls. A tax system doesn't just collect money. It also affects how citizens view their relationship with government. That's why fairness matters, not only economically, but socially.
and politically. Rule number 2, certainty. This may be the most underrated principle on Smith's list. He argued that taxes should be clear and predictable. People should know how much they owe, when they owe it, how they must pay it. That sounds obvious today, but in Smith's time, taxes were often confusing and inconsistent. Government officials sometimes had enormous discretion. Rules could change unexpectedly. Different people could be treated differently. Smith saw this as a serious problem. Imagine running a business today. You're deciding whether to hire workers, expand operations, or invest millions into a new project. Now imagine you have no idea what your future tax burden will be. The government might suddenly change the rules. Tax rates might jump unexpectedly. Enforcement might vary from person to person. Would you feel confident investing? Probably not. Uncertainty creates hesitation. Businesses dislike uncertainty. Investors dislike uncertainty. Consumers dislike uncertainty. People can adapt to almost any rule. What they struggle with is constantly changing rules. Smith understood by predictability encourages economic activity. When people know the rules, they can plan. When they can plan, they invest. When they invest, economies grow. That's why certainty remains a cornerstone of modern tax policy. Rule number 3, convenience. This principle sounds simple, but it's incredibly practical. Smith argued that taxes should be collected at a time and in a manner that is convenient for the taxpayer. Think about how many taxes today are deducted automatically. Income taxes are often withheld from paychecks. Sales taxes are collected at the point of purchase. Property taxes usually follow predictable schedules. Governments don't generally send officials to your house demanding random payments. And that's a good thing, because complexity creates costs. The harder it is to comply with tax laws, the more time and money people waste trying to navigate the system. Imagine a tax system requiring citizens to travel long distances, fill out endless paperwork, and deal with constant bureaucratic obstacles. Even if the tax rates themselves were reasonable, the process would still be frustrating. Smith believed government should minimize that burden. A good tax system should collect revenue without unnecessarily disrupting people's lives. This principle is still highly relevant. Today, governments around the world invest heavily in digital filing systems, online payment platforms, and simplified reporting procedures. Why? Because convenience improves compliance. People are more likely to follow rules when those rules are easy to follow. Rule number 4, efficiency. This final principle may be the most economically important. Smith believed a tax system should collect revenue with minimal waste. In other words, the cost of collecting taxes should not consume an excessive portion of the taxes being collected. That sounds straightforward, but it has profound implications. Imagine a government spends $10 million collecting a tax that generates only $12 million in revenue. Technically, the government collected taxes. But was it worth it? Probably not. The system itself consumed most of the resources. Smith argued that taxation should be efficient not only for government, but also for society. Badly designed taxes can discourage work, discourage investment, discourage entrepreneurship, discourage innovation. The goal should be to raise necessary revenue while minimizing unnecessary economic damage. This idea remains central to modern economic policy. Economists still debate which taxes create the fewest distortions. Policymakers still analyze compliance costs. Businesses still evaluate tax incentives when making investment decisions. The conversation has become more sophisticated, but the underlying principle remains the same. Collect revenue efficiently, avoid creating unnecessary obstacles to growth. Why these 4 rules still matter? What makes Smith's tax principles remarkable is their simplicity. They're not tied to a particular political party. They're not tied to a specific country. They're not tied to a particular era. Whether you're discussing taxes in the 18th century or the 21st century, the same questions keep appearing. Is the system fair? Is it predictable? Is it easy to comply with? Is it efficient? Those questions never go away. That's why economists continue referencing Smith's framework centuries later. The technology changes, the economy changes, the tax code changes, but the underlying challenges remain surprisingly similar. Governments need revenue, citizens want fairness, businesses want predictability, societies want growth. A successful tax system must balance all of those goals. Adam Smith understood that taxation is not simply about collecting money. It's about maintaining trust. When people believe the system is fair, clear, convenient, and efficient, they are more willing to participate. And when trust exists, governments can fund the institutions that support prosperity in the first place. National defense, justice, infrastructure, education. All the responsibilities Smith discussed earlier in Book 5 depend on one thing: revenue. And revenue depends on a tax system people can live with. That's why these 4 principles became some of the most enduring ideas in the entire wealth of nations. More than 2.5 centuries later, they remain the foundation of how much of the world thinks about taxation.
Imagine 2 people spending money. The first person is spending their own money on themselves. The second person is spending someone else's money on someone else. Which person is more careful? The answer is obvious. When you're spending your own money, you pay attention. You compare prices. You read reviews. You look for value. You think twice before making a purchase, because every dollar comes directly out of your pocket. Now imagine you're spending someone else's money. The incentive changes. You may still try to be responsible, but you're naturally less careful. After all, you're not personally bearing the cost. This simple observation lies at the heart of one of Adam Smith's most important concerns about government. And honestly, it's one of the reasons the wealth of nations still feels incredibly modern. After discussing defense, justice, infrastructure, education, and taxation, Smith turns his attention to another question. What happens after the government collects all that money? Because raising revenue is only half the challenge. Spending it wisely is the other half. And that's where things often go wrong. Adam Smith recognized something about human nature that hasn't changed in more than 250 years. People tend to be more careful with their own resources than with resources that belong to others. This isn't necessarily because they're dishonest. It's because incentives matter. Think about a small business owner. Every expense affects profits. Every bad decision has consequences. If the owner wastes money repeatedly, the business eventually suffers. Customers leave. Revenue declines. The company may fail. The market provides constant feedback. Good decisions are rewarded. Bad decisions are punished. Now, compare that to a large government bureaucracy. If a department spends inefficiently, the consequences are often less immediate. The organization may receive the same budget next year. The people making spending decisions may not personally lose money. In some cases, departments are even encouraged to spend their entire budgets so they won't receive cuts in the future. As strange as that sounds, it creates a very different set of incentives. Adam Smith understood this problem. He wasn't arguing that government employees are bad people, nor was he claiming that private companies are always efficient. Businesses waste money too. Anyone who has worked inside a large corporation knows that. But Smith believed government institutions face unique challenges because the connection between decision-making and consequences is often weaker. In the private sector, poor decisions usually become visible quickly. A restaurant serves terrible food. Customers stop coming. A company sells products nobody wants. Sales decline. An entrepreneur makes repeated mistakes. The business loses money. The feedback is often immediate and unavoidable. Government operates differently. Many public services don't have direct competitors. Many programs pursue goals that are difficult to measure. Success and failure can be harder to define. As a result, inefficiencies can survive for much longer. Smith worried that this could lead to waste, not because government spending isn't inherently bad, but because accountability becomes more important when spending other people's money. This idea remains highly relevant today. Across the political spectrum, people often complain about government waste. Different groups may disagree about which programs are wasteful, but the concern itself is universal. Nobody likes seeing resources wasted. Taxpayers want their money used effectively. Citizens want results. And governments want public trust. The challenge is figuring out how to achieve those goals. Adam Smith's answer focused heavily on accountability. If institutions spend public money, the public should be able to see how that money is being used. Transparency matters. Oversight matters. Clear objectives matter. Measurement matters. Without these things, waste becomes easier to hide. Think about a household budget. Most families know approximately where their money goes: housing, food, transportation, utilities, savings. If spending suddenly doubles in one category, people notice. Questions get asked. Adjustments get made. Smith believed governments should face similar scrutiny. Public money should not be treated as unlimited. Resources are always scarce. Every dollar spent on one priority is a dollar unavailable for another.
This concept is known in economics as opportunity cost, and it's something Smith emphasized throughout his work. Suppose a government spends billions on a project that produces little value. The loss isn't just the money itself. The loss also includes everything that money could have accomplished elsewhere: new infrastructure, better schools, improved healthcare, tax relief, debt reduction. Every decision involves trade-offs. That's why spending decisions matter so much. What's particularly interesting is that Smith didn't simply criticize government. He also acknowledged that many government functions are necessary. Remember, this is the same man who supported national defense, supported courts, supported public infrastructure, supported education. His argument wasn't that government should do nothing. His argument was that government should do necessary things efficiently. That's a crucial distinction. In modern political debates, people often act as if there are only two positions. Either government is the solution to every problem, or government is the problem. Smith occupied a much more nuanced position. He recognized the value of government institutions, but he also recognized their weaknesses. Just as markets can fail, governments can fail. Just as businesses can become inefficient, bureaucracies can become inefficient. The goal is not blind faith in either system. The goal is understanding their strengths and limitations. This balanced perspective may be one of Smith's greatest strengths as a thinker. He wasn't interested in ideology for its own sake. He was interested in incentives. How do people behave? What motivates decision-making? What systems encourage good outcomes? What systems encourage bad outcomes? These questions guided his analysis, and they remain incredibly useful today. Because whether we're discussing governments, businesses, nonprofits, or individuals, one principle remains remarkably consistent. People respond to incentives. Organizations respond to incentives. Systems respond to incentives. When incentives encourage responsibility, efficiency often improves. When incentives weaken accountability, waste often grows. Adam Smith saw this clearly. That's why Book 5 doesn't end with taxation, it ends with spending. Because collecting revenue is relatively easy. Using it wisely is much harder. A government may have the best intentions in the world, but intentions alone don't guarantee good results. Effective institutions require transparency, accountability, oversight, and constant evaluation. Without those things, even necessary government functions can become inefficient. And that's the lesson Smith leaves us with here. The question isn't simply whether government should spend money. The question is whether it spends that money in ways that genuinely serve the public. Because every dollar collected from taxpayers represents effort, time, and sacrifice. And that makes responsible stewardship one of the most important duties any government can have.
After hundreds of pages discussing wealth, trade, specialization, prices, taxes, government spending, defense, justice, infrastructure, and education, Adam Smith arrives at a conclusion that surprises many people. It isn't government should run everything, and it definitely isn't government should do nothing. Instead, Smith arrives at something far more practical. A successful society needs both markets and institutions. That is the central message of Book 5, and in many ways, it's the message that ties together everything in The Wealth of Nations. When people first hear about Adam Smith, they often focus on competition, the invisible hand, free enterprise, individual self-interest. Those ideas are important. They're part of what made Smith one of the most influential thinkers in history. But if that's all you take away from his work, you're missing half the picture. Because Smith understood something many people still struggle to understand today. Markets are incredibly powerful, but they are not self-sustaining. They depend on foundations that exist outside the market itself. Think about a skyscraper. When people admire a skyscraper, they usually look at the visible part, the glass, the steel, the architecture, the height. Nobody stands outside saying, "Wow, look at that foundation." Yet the foundation is what makes everything else possible. Without it, the entire structure collapses. Adam Smith believed markets work the same way. The visible part is commerce, businesses, factories, investments, innovation, entrepreneurship. The invisible foundation is institutions, courts, property rights, national defense, infrastructure, education, stable governance. Most people don't think about these things every day, but without them, economic activity becomes much harder. Throughout Book 5, Smith systematically explains these foundations. A nation must be protected from external threats. That's defense. Citizens must trust that contracts will be enforced. That's justice. Goods and people must be able to move efficiently. That's infrastructure. Workers and citizens must continue developing their abilities. That's education. Government must fund these responsibilities fairly and efficiently. That's taxation. Each piece supports the others. Together, they create an environment where individuals can pursue their own goals.
And that's what makes Smith's vision so different from many modern caricatures. People sometimes portray him as a champion of unrestricted capitalism, a thinker who believed markets solve every problem. But if you've actually read Book 5, that interpretation becomes difficult to defend. Smith clearly believed government has important responsibilities. The key question was never whether government should exist. The key question was, what should government do? And equally important, what should government not do? That's where Smith's balance becomes so impressive. He believed government should provide the foundations of prosperity, but he did not believe government should replace individual initiative. He wanted institutions strong enough to maintain order, but not so powerful that they suffocate freedom. He wanted government capable of supporting economic growth, but not government attempting to control every economic decision. In other words, he was searching for balance. And balance is rarely exciting. Extremes are easier. It's easy to say, the government should solve everything. It's also easy to say, the government should stay out of everything. Both positions sound simple. Neither reflects reality. Real societies are more complicated. Real economies are more complicated. And Adam Smith understood that. Imagine a society with no government at all. No courts, no police, no military, no property rights, no infrastructure, no public education. Would markets function effectively? Almost certainly not. Now imagine the opposite extreme. A government controls every industry, sets every price, directs every investment decision, determines every economic outcome. Would innovation flourish? Would entrepreneurship thrive? Would competition drive progress? Probably not. Smith believed prosperity exists somewhere between those extremes. Markets create wealth because individuals have freedom to innovate, compete, and cooperate voluntarily. Institutions create stability because they provide the rules and protections that make those activities possible. Neither side works particularly well alone. The relationship is more like an ecosystem. Businesses depend on institutions depend on economic prosperity, workers depend on both, consumers depend on both, investors depend on both. Everyone benefits when the balance works. Everyone suffers when it breaks down. This is one reason The Wealth of Nations remains relevant more than 250 years after it was published. The technologies have changed, the industries have changed, the political systems have changed, the global economy has changed, but the underlying questions remain remarkably familiar. How much government is enough? How much is too much? How do we encourage growth? How do we maintain fairness? How do we preserve freedom while maintaining order? Every generation asks these questions, and every generation struggles to answer them. Adam Smith didn't provide a perfect formula. No one can. Societies evolve, circumstances change, new challenges emerge. But he did provide a framework for thinking about these issues, and that framework remains incredibly useful. Look at the most prosperous societies in the world today. Despite their differences, most share certain characteristics: strong legal systems, reliable property rights, functional infrastructure, educated populations, reasonably effective governments, competitive markets. In many ways, they reflect the principles Smith outlined centuries ago, not because politicians worship Adam Smith, but because the underlying logic remains sound. People need freedom to create value. They also need institutions that protect the conditions under which value can be created. That's the real legacy of Book 5, and perhaps the real legacy of The Wealth of Nations itself. The book is not simply about making money. It's about understanding the conditions that allow entire societies to become prosperous. And Smith's final insight is surprisingly simple. Wealth is not created by markets alone, nor is it created by governments alone. Prosperity emerges when free individuals operate within strong, stable, and effective institutions. That balance is what turns economic activity into lasting wealth. That balance is what transforms commerce into civilization. And more than 2 centuries later, that lesson remains just as important as ever.